The day I found the documents was the day my entire world collapsed. Standing in my father's study, my hands trembling as I held papers that revealed decades of lies, I felt something break inside me, something that would never be repaired. How could the people who raised me, who told me they loved me more than anything, orchestrate something so calculated, so cruel? In that moment, I understood that my entire life had been built on a foundation of deception. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, before the betrayal that would force me to rebuild my life from nothing. Growing up in the quiet suburbs of Northern California, I was what you'd call a child of privilege. My father, Richard, was a successful investment banker who had built his wealth through what I believed was honest hard work and smart decisions. My mother, Catherine, was a former art curator who gave up her career to raise me and my younger brother, Thomas. We lived in a sprawling 5-bedroom house with a pool in the backyard and took vacations to Europe every summer. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. Successful, happy, and whole. "Family is everything," my father would say during our Sunday dinners, raising his glass in a toast that became our weekly tradition. When the world turns its back on you, family will always be there. Remember that. I believed him with every fiber of my being. I trusted my parents implicitly, the way children do when they've never been given a reason not to. They cheered at my soccer games, helped with homework, and taught me about integrity and honesty. The irony of those lessons still makes my stomach turn. My childhood memories are bathed in a golden glow. Baking cookies with Mom during Christmas, Dad teaching me to fish at our lakeside cabin, family movie nights where we'd all pile onto the oversized sectional sofa with bowls of popcorn. These weren't fabrications. These moments really happened. That's what makes everything that followed so much harder to reconcile. I was always the responsible one, the planner, the achiever. While Thomas was more free-spirited and creative, I followed in Dad's footsteps. I studied economics at college, graduated with honors, and landed a job at a prestigious financial firm. Not my father's, as I wanted to prove I could succeed on my own merit, but one where his name still opened doors. By 28, I had a corner office, a sleek downtown apartment, and a 3-year relationship with Alex, who I thought was the love of my life. I had followed the path laid out for me with dedicated precision. Work hard, save money, build connections, trust family. These were the pillars of my existence. My brother took a different route. He struggled through college, changing majors 3 times before dropping out to find himself. My parents were surprisingly supportive of his choices, something that occasionally triggered a pang of resentment in me. I had done everything right, yet Thomas seemed to receive the same love and financial support despite his lack of direction. "He's just finding his way," Mom would say when I expressed frustration. "Everyone's journey is different." I accepted this explanation because that's what families do. They support each other unconditionally, even when they don't understand each other's choices. Or at least that's what I believed. The first hairline fracture in my perfect life appeared during my parents' 35th anniversary celebration. I had spent weeks planning an intimate gathering at their favorite restaurant, coordinating with relatives flying in from across the country. Thomas had promised to help, but in typical fashion, he was unreachable for days before the event, finally showing up minutes before our parents arrived. "Where have you been?" I hissed as he straightened his tie in the restaurant's entryway. "Relax," he said with that easy smile that always seemed to get him out of trouble. "I'm here now, aren't I?" But there was something different about him that night. A nervous energy, a reluctance to meet my eyes. When he hugged our father, I noticed Dad slip something into Thomas's pocket. A check, I assumed, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the whispered exchange that followed, the way they both glanced around to make sure no one was watching. I dismissed it as nothing. A father helping his son financially wasn't exactly headline news, even if Thomas was 32 and should have been standing on his own feet by now. The dinner went perfectly. Champagne flowed, stories were shared, and my parents looked as in love as they had in their wedding photos. As the night wound down, I found myself alone with my father at the bar while Mom chatted with her sister. "I'm proud of you," he said, placing his hand on my shoulder. You know that, right? Thanks, Dad. His approval still meant everything to me. You've built quite a life for yourself. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. But there's something I need to talk to you about. Not tonight, this is a celebration. Soon. There are some family matters we need to discuss. A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the restaurant. Is everything okay? Of course, he said quickly, too quickly. Just some business arrangements I want to bring you into. It's time you knew more about the family's financial situation. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of pride that he was finally taking me into his confidence, and unease at the gravity in his voice. Whatever these business arrangements were, they seemed to weigh heavily on him. 2 days later, my father had a massive heart attack while playing golf. He was rushed to the hospital, and for 48 hours, we maintained a vigil by his bedside. He stabilized but remained unconscious. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but as days turned into a week, that optimism began to fade. It was during this time that I first noticed the strange behavior from my mother and brother. They would have hushed conversations that abruptly stopped when I approached. Thomas suddenly seemed to have access to information about my father's business that I'd never been privy to. And one evening, I overheard my mother on the phone, saying words that made no sense to me at the time. If he wakes up and tells her everything, we're finished. I convinced myself I had misheard, that the stress of my father's condition was making me paranoid. But the seed of doubt had been planted. As Dad remained unconscious, I took it upon myself to gather his important documents, insurance policies, account information, anything that might be needed if the worst happened. That's what led me to his home office that fateful day, to the locked drawer in his desk that I found the key for hidden in a false bottom of his trophy case. I expected to find wills, insurance papers, maybe some investment information. What I found instead were documents that would unravel every truth I thought I knew about my family, my childhood, and myself. And as I stood there, the manila folder open in my shaking hands, I had no idea that this moment was only the beginning of a betrayal so complete, so devastating, that it would leave me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a burning need to rebuild my life from its ashes. The worst part, the people I trusted most, the ones who were supposed to love me unconditionally, were the architects of my destruction. The documents in my hands told a story so different from the one I'd lived that I initially refused to believe it. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe these papers belonged to someone else. Maybe this was some elaborate setup for a surprise my father had planned. But deep down I knew. The letterhead was real. The signatures were authentic. And most damning of all, they contained details only insiders would know. The first document was a series of bank statements from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account with my father's name on it, containing millions of dollars that had never been declared on any tax return I'd ever helped prepare for my parents. Money laundered through a complex web of shell companies and fake charitable foundations. But that was just the beginning. The second set of papers revealed that my father's investment firm wasn't the legitimate business I'd always believed it to be. For decades, he had been running an elaborate Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay returns to earlier ones while siphoning off millions for our family's lifestyle. The names on the victim list made me physically ill. Elderly couples, widows, former colleagues, even some of our neighbors and family friends. People who had trusted my father with their life savings because they believed in his integrity, just as I had. I sank into my father's leather chair, the room spinning around me. Every vacation, every gift, every tuition payment, all paid for with stolen money. Our entire life of privilege had been built on deception and theft. But the third document was what truly broke me. It was an agreement dated 20 years earlier, with both my parents' signatures at the bottom. As I read through the legal jargon, the truth emerged like a monster from the depths. Thomas wasn't actually my brother. He was my cousin, the son of my mother's sister who had died in a car accident when he was just 2 years old. My parents had taken him in, not out of the goodness of their hearts as they'd always claimed, but because they had been paid an enormous sum of money by my aunt's estate to raise him as their own. The agreement stipulated that when Thomas turned 35, He would receive control of a trust fund worth over $20 million. Money that was rightfully his inheritance. But there was a clause that made my blood run cold. If Thomas died before reaching 35, the money would go to his legal guardians, my parents. Thomas was 34 now, less than a year away from claiming what was rightfully his. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. The whispered conversations, the checks passed to Thomas, my father's urgent need to talk to me about family matters. He had wanted to confess, to come clean before it was too late. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely return the papers to the folder. I needed air. I needed to think. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't part of this nightmare. As I turned to leave the office, I came face to face with my mother standing in the doorway. Her eyes moved from my face to the folder in my hands, and in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. "What are you doing in here?" Her voice was unnaturally high. I held up the folder. "What is this? Is it true?" She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "You weren't supposed to find those. Not those aren't real or there's an explanation. Just, you weren't supposed to find them." In that moment, the last shred of hope I had that this was all some misunderstanding disintegrated. "Does Thomas know?" Yes. "Does he know who he really is? What you and Dad have been doing with his money?" "Keep your voice down," she hissed, glancing nervously at the door. "Thomas is downstairs. Answer me," I demanded, my voice breaking. She sank onto the small sofa in the corner of the office, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. "It's complicated. Complicated," I repeated incredulously. "You stole millions from innocent people. You've been keeping Thomas's inheritance from him. There's nothing complicated about that." "We didn't steal from Thomas," she said defensively. "We raised him as our own son. We gave him everything. Everything except the truth. And what about all these other people?" I shook the folder containing the lists of my father's victims. "What about them?" "Your father did what he had to do," she said, her chin lifting with a defiance that stunned me. "Do you think all those other investment bankers made their fortunes honestly? This is how the game is played." I stared at her, this woman who had taught me about honesty and integrity, who had volunteered at homeless shelters and organized charity fundraisers, who had seemed to embody everything good and decent. Had it all been an act? "I'm going to tell Thomas," I said. "And then I'm going to the authorities." The change that came over her face was instantaneous and terrifying. The familiar warmth in her eyes hardened into something cold and calculating. "No, you're not," she said quietly. "Think about what that would mean. Your father would go to prison. Everything would be seized, the house, the cars, your trust fund. Is that what you want?" "My trust fund," I repeated. "You think I care about money right now?" "You should," she replied. "Where do you think the down payment for your apartment came from? The seed money for your investment portfolio? You've benefited from this arrangement your entire life." Her words hit me like a physical blow. She was right. I had taken the money, used it to build my life, never questioning its source. Did that make me complicit? "I didn't know," I whispered. "Ignorance won't protect you," she said, standing up and smoothing her skirt with practiced composure. "If this comes out, you'll be investigated too. Your career will be over. Everything you've worked for gone." She reached for the folder, but I clutched it to my chest. "Give me those papers," she demanded. "No." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't be foolish. Your father is fighting for his life. Do you really want to destroy what's left of this family?" Family. The word that had once meant everything to me now felt hollow, poisoned. "I need time to think," I said, moving toward the door. "There's nothing to think about," she said. "Put those papers back where you found them and forget you ever saw them. That's the only way forward for all of us." I left without responding, the folder hidden inside my jacket. As I passed Thomas in the hallway, he gave me a curious look. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." If only he knew. I forced a smile. Just worried about Dad. I'm going to get some air. Outside, I sat in my car, clutching the steering wheel as if it were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned liquid and unstable. Who could I trust? Who could I turn to? Alex was away on a business trip, and even if they weren't, how could I possibly explain this? I started the engine and drove aimlessly, my mind racing through scenarios, each more devastating than the last. If I went to the authorities, my father would certainly go to prison, and possibly my mother too. Our assets would be frozen, the house seized. Thomas would learn the truth about his identity in the most traumatic way possible. But if I said nothing, I would be protecting criminals. People who had stolen dreams and futures from innocent victims. People who had lied to me my entire life. As night fell, I found myself parked outside Alex's empty apartment building, still no closer to a decision. My phone had been buzzing incessantly. Calls from my mother, from Thomas, even from my father's business partner, Leonard, who had always been like an uncle to me. I ignored them all. Finally, I called the hospital to check on my father's condition. No change, they told me. Still unconscious, still stable. I needed to talk to someone who knew my father, someone who might have insights into what was really going on. Despite my reservations, I dialed Leonard's number. "Thank God," he answered immediately. "We've been worried sick. Where are you?" "I need to talk to you," I said, ignoring his question. "About Dad's business. About what he's really been doing all these years." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" "I found the documents, Leonard. I know about the Ponzi scheme. I know about Thomas's trust fund." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming careful, measured. "Where are you?" he repeated. "We should discuss this in person." Something in his tone sent warning signals through my body. "Why don't you tell me your side first?" "There are things you don't understand," he said. "Contexts you're missing. Your father had plans to make everything right. Make it right. How do you make right decades of fraud?" "Meet me at the office," he said, ignoring my question. "I can explain everything. Show you the whole picture." "I'll think about it," I said and hung up. As I sat there in the darkened car, my phone lit up with a text message. From Thomas. "Mom told me what happened. We need to talk. Don't do anything stupid." So my mother had already spoken to him. But what had she told him? The truth. A version of it. Or another lie to add to the mountain of deception. I turned off my phone and started the car again. There was one person I could think of who might know something, who wasn't directly involved in the family dynamics. My father's executive assistant, Margot. She had been with him for over 15 years and knew more about his day-to-day business than anyone. It was almost midnight when I knocked on her door. She answered in a bathrobe, her face creased with sleep and surprise. "What are you doing here at this hour?" she asked, clutching her robe closed. "I need to know the truth, Margot," I said. "About my father's business. About what he's really been doing." Her face drained of color. She glanced nervously over her shoulder into the dark apartment, then back at me. "You should leave," she whispered. "Now. Please," I begged. "I found documents. I know about the fraud. I just need to understand." "You don't understand anything," she cut in, her voice urgent. "If they know you've figured it out, you're in danger. Real danger." "What are you talking about? Who's they?" Her eyes darted past me to the empty hallway. "Your mother. Leonard. They're not who you think they are." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping even lower. "Your father was going to turn himself in. He had a meeting scheduled with the FBI the day after he collapsed. He couldn't live with the guilt anymore." The world seemed to tilt under my feet. The FBI. He kept records. A backup of everything in case something happened to him. Her eyes locked onto mine. "He was afraid, especially after the threats started." My father was threatened. By whom? But Margot was already retreating into her apartment. "I've said too much. Sorry. I can't help you." As the door closed in my face, her final whispered words reached me. "Trust no one, especially not family." I stood there, frozen in the hallway, as the enormity of what she'd said sank in. My father had been planning to confess, to make things right, and someone, possibly my own mother, might have wanted to stop him permanently. The documents in my possession were suddenly more than evidence of past crimes. They were potentially a motive for attempted murder. I spent that night in my car, parked in a 24-hour grocery store lot, too afraid to go home or to a hotel where I might be traced. Margot's warning echoed in my mind. Trust no one, especially not family. Words that would have seemed melodramatic and absurd just days earlier now felt like a lifeline. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by nightmares where my mother stood over my father's hospital bed, disconnecting tubes while smiling at me. I woke at dawn, stiff and disoriented, with over 30 missed calls on my phone, most from my mother and Thomas, but several from Leonard and even a few from Alex, who must have been contacted by my family. I texted Alex only. "Need space. Family emergency. Will explain later." Then I turned my phone off again. My first stop was a copy shop that had just opened. I made duplicates of every document from the folder, then stored the originals in a safety deposit box at a bank where I wasn't known. Next, I went to a discount store and bought prepaid phones, a laptop, and clothes. Basic necessities for what I was beginning to realize might be a longer absence from my life than I'd initially imagined. By noon, I was sitting in a nondescript cafe with free Wi-Fi, sipping coffee that tasted like nothing as I researched what I should do next. The magnitude of my father's crimes was staggering. Preliminary estimates suggested his scheme had defrauded investors of over $80 million. Some victims had lost everything: retirement savings, college funds, homes. Looking at their names, I recognized many from dinner parties and charity events over the years. People who had hugged me, asked about my career, told me how lucky I was to have such wonderful parents. The shame was suffocating. As for Thomas's trust fund, it was more complex than I'd initially understood. The money had been placed in a trust managed by my father until Thomas turned 35. Perfectly legal if ethically dubious. But over the years, my father had systematically drained the account, using the funds to pay returns to his investment victims when the scheme began to falter. Of the original $20 million, less than $2 million remained. No wonder my parents had been so supportive of Thomas's aimless lifestyle. No wonder they'd encouraged his lack of financial responsibility. They needed him dependent on them, unquestioning, until they could figure out how to hide the theft permanently. But my father's conscience had finally caught up with him. According to what Margot had told me, he was going to confess everything. The fraud, the theft from Thomas, all of it. And someone had stopped him. Using the prepaid phone, I called the hospital from the cafe bathroom, identifying myself as family checking on Richard's condition. "There's been a change," the nurse said, her voice professionally neutral. "He regained consciousness early this morning." My heart leapt. Can he speak? Limited communication, but yes. His family is with him now. My mother and Thomas were already there. What was being said? What story was my father being told, or coached to tell? I thanked the nurse and hung up, my mind racing. If my father was conscious, he could confirm or deny what I'd discovered. He could tell me if he'd really planned to go to the FBI, if he feared for his safety. But with my mother at his bedside, would he tell the truth? I needed leverage, something that would force honest answers. Looking down at the copied document spread on the cafe table, I realized I had it already. Evidence of crimes that could send multiple people to prison. The question was how to use it without putting myself in more danger. As I gathered the papers, my eye caught a name I hadn't noticed before, buried in the transaction records of one of the shell companies. Margaret Winters. Margot's full name. She'd received regular payments for years, separate from her salary at the company. My stomach sank. She knew. Of course she knew. She'd been my father's assistant for 15 years. How could she not have been aware of the fraud? Her warning the night before took on a new dimension. Was she really trying to protect me or herself? I was truly alone in this. At 2 p.m., I steeled myself and called Leonard from the prepaid phone, making sure to block the number. "It's me," I said when he answered. "Thank God," he exhaled. "Where have you been? Your mother is frantic." "I bet she is," I said coldly. "Dad's awake." "Oz." "Yes, he regained consciousness a few hours ago." "He's asking for you." "Is he? Or are you saying that to get me to come in?" "What are you talking about? Of course he's asking for you. He's your father. A father who's been stealing from innocent people for decades. Who's been lying to his own family." Leonard sighed heavily. "It's not that simple, and you know it. Your father made mistakes, yes, but he's not the monster you're making him out to be. Come to the hospital. Talk to him. Hear his side." "What about my mother's side? Or yours? How long have you known about the Ponzi scheme, Leonard? How involved are you?" "These are complicated matters that shouldn't be discussed over the phone," he said, his voice tightening. "If you care about your father at all, you'll come see him. The doctors say his condition is still critical." "I'll think about it," I said and hung up. I sat in the cafe until closing, weighing my options. Going to the hospital felt like walking into a trap, but staying away meant possibly losing my chance to hear the truth from my father directly. In the end, the need for answers outweighed my fear. At 10 p.m., when visiting hours were over and the hospital would be quieter, I made my way to the medical center. I'd worked there as a volunteer in high school and knew the layout well, including the service elevators that could take me to the ICU floor without passing the main nurses' station. Luck was with me. The night shift had just started, and the new nurses were in their handover meeting. I slipped down the hallway to my father's room unnoticed. Through the small window in the door, I could see him alone inside, hooked up to monitors, his normally robust frame looking shrunken in the hospital bed. I took a deep breath and entered. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open at the sound of the door. For a moment, confusion clouded his face, then recognition. "You came," he whispered, his voice raspy. I moved closer but kept my distance from the bed. "I found the documents in your office." Pain that had nothing to do with his physical condition washed over his face. "I wanted to tell you myself. Before." "Before what?" "Before Mom and Leonard could spin their version." He looked away. "You don't understand the position I was in." "Then explain it to me," I demanded, keeping my voice low. "Explain how you stole from all those people. How you and Mom lied about Thomas. How you stole his inheritance." "We didn't steal Thomas," he said weakly. "We love him as our own." "That's not what I asked." My father closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. "The fraud." "It didn't start out as fraud. I made some bad investments, lost client money I couldn't afford to lose. I borrowed from other accounts to cover it, thinking I could make it back quickly." He swallowed with difficulty. "But I couldn't. And then it snowballed. The oldest justification in the book. And Thomas's money. Did that snowball too?" "That was different," he said, a hint of defensiveness entering his voice. "Catherine's sister made me trustee. The money was supposed to be for Thomas's care and education, with the remainder going to him at 35. But the market crashed in 2008, and some of our biggest investors wanted to withdraw. If I'd let them, the whole thing would have collapsed then. Everyone would have lost everything. So you stole from Thomas instead." "I borrowed," he corrected, as if the semantics mattered. "I always intended to pay it back before he turned 35. "With what money?" Challenged. "The scheme was collapsing. You were running out of new investors." He didn't answer directly, which was an answer in itself. "I wanted to protect you," he said finally. "To keep you out of it. That's why I never brought you into the business. Why I encouraged you to build your own career." A bitter laugh escaped me. "How noble. Except you used your dirty money to help me get started. Mom made that very clear." "Catherine said that." He looked genuinely surprised. "She said I was complicit. That if this came out, I'd go down with you. Something shifted in my father's eyes. A hardening, a resolve. Listen to me carefully, he said, his voice stronger now. Whatever happens to me, you need to protect yourself. Catherine and Leonard. They're not who you think they are. A chill ran down my spine, echoing Margot's warning. What do you mean? The heart attack, he said, glancing nervously at the door. It wasn't natural. I've been feeling fine. No symptoms, no warning signs. Are you saying someone caused it? He nodded slightly. The day before, I told Catherine I couldn't do it anymore. The lies, the stealing. I was going to turn myself in, make a deal with the prosecutors. You were going to the FBI, I said, remembering what Margot had told me. His eyes widened. How did you know that? Margot told me. Last night. You spoke to Margot. Alarm flashed across his face. Be careful. She's. The door swung open behind me. I turned to find my mother standing in the doorway. Her expression shifting rapidly from surprise to controlled anger. Finally decided to show up, she said, stepping into the room and letting the door close behind her. We've been worried sick. Have you? I said, moving subtly to keep myself between her and my father. Or were you worried about what Dad might tell me? Her eyes darted to my father, then back to me. I don't know what you mean. I think you do, I said. Dad was just explaining how his heart attack might not have been natural. How he was planning to go to the FBI before it happened. If I expected her to look shocked or guilty, I was disappointed. Instead, she laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. Richard, are you feeding our child these paranoid fantasies? The doctors explained exactly what happened. Arterial blockage, exacerbated by stress and your terrible diet. The ease with which she lied was chilling. What else had she managed to make me believe over the years? It's not paranoia, my father insisted weakly. The timing was unfortunate, yes, she cut in. But completely coincidental. Now isn't the time for wild accusations. We need to focus on your recovery and on damage control for the business. The business is over, I said. It was never legitimate to begin with. My mother's face hardened. Keep your voice down. These walls are thin. Are you more worried about people overhearing or about facing consequences? Yes. I'm worried about our family, she hissed. About protecting what we've built. What you've stolen, you mean? She took a step toward me, and I instinctively backed away. You have no idea what it takes to build the life we gave you, she said, her voice low and intense. The sacrifices we made, the risks we took. Your father may have lost his nerve, but I haven't lost mine. The implication in her words sent ice through my veins. Did you do something to him? I whispered. To cause the heart attack. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. This is a power of attorney, giving me control over your father's medical decisions and business affairs while he's incapacitated. He signed it this morning. I looked at my father, who shook his head almost imperceptibly. I didn't, he whispered. My mother ignored him. The doctors say the heart attack may have affected his memory. He's confused, saying all sorts of things that don't make sense. You forged his signature, I said. The reality of who my mother truly was finally sinking in. You're setting him up. I'm protecting this family, she corrected. Something your father was no longer willing to do. The monitors tracking my father's heart rate began to beat more rapidly as his pulse increased. He reached weakly for my hand. The evidence, he managed to say. My office. Behind the... That's enough, my mother snapped. She moved to the call button by his bed and pressed it. The nurses will be here any moment. You can either leave now, quietly, or I'll tell them you've been upsetting a critical patient and have security escort you out. I looked at my father, torn between wanting to stay with him and knowing I needed to find whatever evidence he was trying to tell me about. Go, he whispered. Find it. As my mother watched with cold eyes, I bent down and whispered in my father's ear. I'll be back. Stay alive. In the hallway, I nearly collided with a nurse rushing toward the room, summoned by my mother's call. Behind her was Thomas, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He stopped short when he saw me. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "We've been calling you for days." I studied his face, searching for signs of complicity. Did he know about the fraud? About his true identity? About what might have been done to our father? I needed space to process, I said carefully. It's not every day you discover your entire life has been a lie. Confusion crossed his features. What are you talking about? Either he was an excellent actor, or he truly didn't know. I made a split-second decision. Thomas, what has Mom told you about Dad's condition? About his business? He glanced toward the hospital room door. That he had a heart attack brought on by stress from some investment problems. That we need to stand together as a family right now. He lowered his voice. And that you found some sensitive documents you shouldn't have, and might be overreacting. Overreacting, I repeated bitterly. Thomas, have you ever wondered why Mom and Dad were so okay with you dropping out of college? With you not having a steady job at 34? He frowned. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, I said. I need to show you something. Not here. Can you meet me tomorrow? The door to my father's room opened, and my mother emerged, her composure fully restored. Ah, Thomas, there you are with the coffee. She smiled at him, then turned her glacial gaze to me. I think it's best if you leave now. Your father needs rest, not more stress. Thomas looked between us, confusion evident on his face. What's going on? Nothing for you to worry about, my mother assured him, taking the coffee cup from his hand. Your sister is just having a difficult time accepting your father's condition. My sister. The lie rolled so easily off her tongue. I'll call you, I said to Thomas, ignoring my mother's darkening expression. Tomorrow. As I walked away, I heard my mother's voice, soft but clear. Don't listen to her, Thomas. She's not thinking clearly right now. I kept walking, not looking back, fear and determination propelling me forward. I needed to get to my father's office before she did. I needed to find whatever evidence he had been trying to tell me about. Evidence that might reveal not just fraud, but attempted murder. And I needed to decide if I could trust Thomas enough to tell him the truth. That he wasn't my brother, and that the people who had raised him had been stealing his inheritance for years. My family was fracturing along fault lines that had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect lives. And I was no longer certain who would be left standing when the earthquake finally stopped. The drive to my parents' house felt surreal, as if I were moving through someone else's life. Streets I had traveled thousands of times now seemed foreign. The sprawling suburban neighborhood where I'd grown up felt like a movie set, beautiful facades hiding ugly secrets. It was nearly midnight when I parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, sticking to the shadows. The house was dark except for a single light in the kitchen, probably the one over the sink that my mother always left on when they were out. I used my key to enter through the side door that led directly to my father's study, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain it would wake the neighbors. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and stood motionless, listening. The house held the distinctive silence of emptiness. No television murmur, no footsteps, no distant voices. My mother was likely still at the hospital with my father, and Thomas was probably with them. Still, I moved with extreme caution, using the flashlight on my phone rather than turning on any lights. My father's final words echoed in my mind. The evidence. My office. Behind what? The painting. The bookshelf. There were dozens of potential hiding places in this wood-paneled sanctuary where I'd spent countless hours watching my father work, believing him to be the embodiment of integrity and success. I started with the obvious. Behind the large oil painting of a sailing ship that had hung on the wall for as long as I could remember. Nothing. Behind the bookshelf. It was built into the wall and didn't budge. The floor safe under the Persian rug. I knew the combination, my birth date, but it contained only passports, cash, and some family jewelry. Nothing incriminating. As the minutes ticked by, desperation began to set in. What if my mother had already found and destroyed whatever my father had hidden? What if he'd been confused, and there was nothing to find at all? I sank into his leather chair, allowing myself a moment of defeat. As my hand absently stroked the worn armrest, my fingers caught on something, a small irregularity in the leather. Looking closer, I noticed a nearly invisible seam running along the inside of the arm. I pressed it, and to my amazement, a small compartment popped open within the chair's arm itself. Inside was a flash drive, unlabeled except for a small piece of tape with the word "insurance" written in my father's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. It was encrypted, requiring a password. I tried the usual suspects: my mother's birth date, their anniversary, combinations of family names. Nothing worked. After the third failed attempt, a warning appeared: 2 attempts remaining before permanent lockout. I stopped, forcing myself to think. What would my father use as a password for something this important? Something he would never forget, but that wouldn't be obvious to others. On a hunch, I typed in Thomas Trust 2025. Combining Thomas's name with the year he would turn 35 and gain access to his trust fund. The drive unlocked. Inside were hundreds of files meticulously organized into folders. Investor records, banking transactions, offshore accounts, and most ominously, threats. I opened the last one first and found a series of emails dating back over 2 years, all sent from anonymous accounts. The messages started as veiled warnings but became increasingly explicit. Do what we agreed or everything comes crashing down. Time is running out. You promised to deliver. Your family won't be protected if you break our arrangement. The most recent was dated just 3 days before my father's heart attack. Last chance. Friday deadline. After that, we take matters into our own hands. Friday, the day my father collapsed on the golf course. But who was threatening him? And what arrangement had he broken? I opened another folder labeled Leonard and found my answer. Documents, emails, and recorded phone conversations proved that Leonard wasn't just aware of the Ponzi scheme. He was actively running much of it and had been for years. More disturbingly, he had connections to several organized crime families who had been using my father's investment firm to launder money. The evidence suggested a terrifying scenario. My father had been trying to extricate himself from these criminal connections and had threatened to expose Leonard if he didn't let him out. Leonard, in turn, had made counter-threats. But the most shocking revelation came in a folder labeled Catherine. Inside was a video file dated just 1 week before my father's heart attack. With shaking hands, I clicked play. The footage showed my father's office. This very room, filmed from what appeared to be a hidden camera in the bookshelf. My mother and Leonard were standing by the desk, their expressions grim. "He's going to ruin everything," my mother was saying, her voice clear in the recording. 30 years of building this life, and he wants to throw it all away because his conscience is bothering him? "Richard's always been the weak link," Leonard replied. "Too soft. I told you that from the beginning." My mother laughed bitterly. "And I didn't listen. My mistake." "The question is what we do now," Leonard said. "If he goes to the FBI with what he knows, we're finished. Both of us. There has to be a way to stop him," my mother mused, her voice chillingly calm. "Something that would incapacitate him temporarily. Give us time to move assets and cover our tracks." Leonard leaned closer. "I might know some people who could help with that. Make it look like natural causes. A heart problem, perhaps." Instead of recoiling in horror, my mother nodded thoughtfully. "Nothing fatal. Just enough to put him in the hospital for a while." "Of course," Leonard agreed, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Just enough to buy us time." The video ended there. I sat frozen, the implications washing over me in nauseating waves. My mother and Leonard had conspired to induce my father's heart attack. They had planned it, discussed it calmly in this very room, as if they were planning a dinner party rather than an attempted murder. I was so absorbed in my horror that I didn't hear the front door open. The first indication I wasn't alone came when the study door swung open, flooding the room with light from the hallway. Thomas stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "I thought I might find you here," he said. I slammed my laptop closed, but not before he caught a glimpse of what I'd been watching. "What was that?" he asked, stepping into the room. "Was that Mom and Leonard?" "Thomas," I said carefully, rising from the chair. "How did you know I was here?" He shrugged. "I didn't for sure, but I know you. When you're upset, you either go for a drive or you come here to Dad's study. It's where you've always felt safe." He paused, studying my face. "What's going on?" "Mom's acting weird. Dad can barely speak without getting agitated, and you've disappeared for days. Someone needs to tell me the truth." I weighed my options quickly. If Thomas was part of the conspiracy, I was cornered. But my gut told me he wasn't, that he was as much a victim in this as the investors my father had defrauded. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite the desk. "There's something you need to know. About Mom and Dad. About yourself." His brow furrowed. "What about me?" "Thomas, this isn't easy to say, but you're not their son. Not biologically." I watched his face carefully as I continued. "You're my cousin. Your mother was Mom's sister. She died when you were 2, and Mom and Dad became your legal guardians." He stared at me, his expression blank with shock. That's not possible." "It is," I said gently. "And there's more. Your mother left you a trust fund, a significant one. Over $20 million that you're supposed to receive when you turn 35. He shook his head in denial. No way. They would have told me." "They didn't tell you because they've been using that money," I explained. "Dad's investment firm has been a fraud for years, a Ponzi scheme. When it started to collapse, he used your trust fund to cover the losses." Thomas stood up abruptly, his chair skidding backward. "This is insane. You're making this up." "I wish I were," I said. "But I have proof. Documents, recordings." I gestured to my laptop, including a video of Mom and Leonard discussing how to incapacitate Dad with a heart attack because he was planning to confess everything to the FBI. Thomas stared at me, his face draining of color. "A heart attack? They planned it." I nodded grimly. "Dad figured out what they were doing. He created this." I held up the flash drive. "As insurance. Evidence of everything." Thomas sank back into his chair, his legs seemingly unable to support him. "I don't understand. If what you're saying is true, why would they raise me? Why not just, I don't know, put me in foster care or something?" "Because of the money," I said simply. "As your guardians, they had control of your trust until you turned 35. They needed you close, dependent on them." A look of dawning comprehension crossed his face. "That's why they never pushed me to get a real job. Why they were fine with me dropping out of college. Why they've kept me on an allowance all these years." His voice broke. "I thought they were being supportive. They were keeping you vulnerable," I corrected gently. "Making sure you'd never question where your money came from." Thomas ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. Brother or cousin, he was still family, the only family member I could possibly trust now. "What do we do?" he asked finally, looking up with eyes that suddenly seemed older. "We need to get this evidence somewhere safe," I said, holding up the flash drive. "And then we need to." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway cut me off. Headlights swept across the windows as a vehicle parked. "Mom," Thomas whispered, moving to peek through the curtains. "No, it's Leonard's car." I quickly unplugged the flash drive and pocketed it. "We need to get out of here. Now." "But what about Dad? If they tried to kill him once?" "We can't help him if we're caught," I said urgently, gathering my laptop. "Once we're safe, we'll figure out how to protect him." We moved quietly toward the side door I'd entered through, but as Thomas reached for the handle, voices became audible from the kitchen. Leonard's distinctive baritone, accompanied by my mother's clipped tones. "Check the hospital security footage," Leonard was saying. "She was there talking to Richard. There's no telling what he told her." "He's heavily medicated," my mother replied. "Even if he said something, it would sound like the ramblings of a sick man. We can't take that chance. Not with the FBI already asking questions." My blood ran cold. The FBI was involved. That meant my father's planned meeting might have been discovered. Thomas and I exchanged alarmed glances as the voices grew louder, moving toward the study. "There's no other way out," Thomas mouthed. I looked around desperately, then pointed to the walk-in supply closet at the back of the study. We slipped inside just as the study door opened, closing the closet door until only a crack remained through which we could see and hear. Leonard strode in first, his normally impeccable appearance disheveled. My mother followed, still wearing the same clothes she'd had on at the hospital. "It has to be here somewhere," Leonard said, moving straight to the wall safe. "Richard wouldn't have gone to the FBI without keeping a copy of the evidence for leverage." My mother watched as he entered the combination to the safe. Apparently she'd shared it with him at some point. "What exactly are we looking for?" she asked. "A flash drive, documents, anything that could link us to the scheme or to Richard's medical emergency." Leonard rifled through the safe's contents, growing visibly frustrated. "It's not here. Could he have given it to her already?" my mother asked, and I knew immediately she was referring to me. Leonard slammed the safe shut. "If he did, we have an even bigger problem. She's been gone for days, not using her phone or credit cards. That's not the behavior of someone who's simply upset about family drama. She's always been too much like Richard," my mother said bitterly. "Too principled for her own good." Leonard began methodically searching the room, checking behind books, under the desk, inside drawers. As he approached the chair I'd been sitting in earlier, my heart stopped. Would he notice the hidden compartment in the armrest? But he merely sat down, running his hands over the desk surface. "We need to consider the possibility that she knows everything and has the evidence. If she takes it to the authorities, then we need to find her first," my mother finished, her voice cold. "Thomas might know where she is." Leonard nodded. "Where is he now?" "At his apartment, I assume. I sent him home from the hospital to get some rest." My mother pulled out her phone. "I'll call him." From our hiding place, I felt Thomas stiffen as his phone began to vibrate in his pocket. He fumbled frantically to silence it, but not before a single buzz was audible in the quiet room. Leonard's head snapped up. "What was that?" My mother frowned, listening as the call went to voicemail. "Thomas isn't answering." Leonard rose from the chair, his gaze scanning the room. "Is someone here?" For an excruciating moment, all was silent. Then, deliberately, Leonard began walking toward the closet. Thomas and I pressed ourselves against the back wall, among the office supplies and old financial records. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The door began to open, and I closed my eyes, preparing for discovery. A sudden crash from the front of the house shattered the silence. Leonard froze, then turned toward the study door. "What was that?" my mother whispered. "Stay here," Leonard commanded, pulling something from his jacket. A gun, I realized with horror. He moved cautiously out of the study toward the source of the noise. My mother hesitated, then followed him, closing the study door behind her. Thomas and I remained frozen, hardly daring to breathe. Minutes passed, and we heard distant voices, too faint to make out the words. Then, abruptly, the front door slammed. "I think they're gone," Thomas whispered after several more minutes of silence. "We can't be sure," I whispered back. "We need to wait." We remained hidden for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. Finally, when the house had stayed completely silent, we ventured out of the closet. The study was empty, the door still closed. I moved to the window and carefully peered out. The driveway was empty. "They left," I confirmed. "But they'll be back." Thomas looked shaken, his face pale. "Leonard had a gun. Were they going to? He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. We both knew what Leonard might have done if he'd found us. We need to go, I said, gathering my things. Right now. Where? Amos asked. Thought for a moment. We need to get this evidence to the FBI. But we also need to make sure Dad is safe. If they suspect he told me anything, they might try to silence him permanently. Thomas nodded, determination replacing the shock on his face. I'll go to the hospital. They won't suspect me of knowing anything. I can keep an eye on Dad, maybe get him moved to a different room or put under security. It's too dangerous, I protested. If they realize you know. He's my father, Thomas interrupted. Maybe not biologically, but in every way that matters. He raised me. And from what you've said, he was finally trying to do the right thing. His jaw set in a stubborn line I recognized all too well. I won't let them hurt him again. I wanted to argue, but I knew that look. Besides, he was right, someone needed to protect our father. Okay, I agreed reluctantly. But be careful. Don't let them know you suspect anything. And keep your phone on. We'll use a code word if either of us is in trouble. What code word? He asked. Thought for a moment. Snowflake. It was your nickname when you were little, remember? Dad called you that because you were born during the biggest snowstorm in decades. Thomas's eyes widened. I always thought it was just a random nickname. It wasn't random, I said softly. It was part of your real history, one of the few true things they kept. We hugged tightly. This man who had been my brother for as long as I could remember. Blood relation or not. He was the only family I had left that I could trust. Be safe, I whispered. You too, he replied. And, thank you, for telling me the truth. As we slipped out of the house separately, Thomas through the front door, me through the side entrance, I clutched the flash drive in my pocket like a talisman. It contained not just evidence of financial crimes, but proof of how thoroughly the people I had trusted most in the world had betrayed that trust. My family's house of cards was finally collapsing. The only question was whether Thomas and I would be crushed beneath the rubble, or if we could somehow escape the destruction and build something honest from the ruins. Dawn found me huddled in a 24-hour diner 40 miles from home, nursing my 5th cup of coffee as I combed through the files on my father's flash drive. The more I read, the more overwhelming the scope of the deception became. This wasn't just about financial fraud or Thomas's inheritance. It was a decades-long web of criminal activity involving money laundering for drug cartels, bribing government officials, and systematic tax evasion across multiple countries. And my mother had been involved from the beginning. The earliest emails between her and Leonard dated back to 1994, well before the Ponzi scheme had started. They discussed opportunities and arrangements in coded language that became clearer in later communications. My mother wasn't an unwitting spouse who had turned a blind eye to her husband's crimes. She had been an architect of them. Most disturbing were the references to containment of problems. People who had discovered too much or threatened to expose the operation. 3 former employees who had resigned suddenly had actually been paid enormous settlements with strict non-disclosure agreements. One investor who had asked too many questions had been framed for tax fraud himself, effectively destroying his credibility. These were not the parents I had known, or thought I had known. These were ruthless operators who had maintained a picture-perfect family life as a cover for their criminal enterprise. My phone vibrated with a text from Thomas, using our agreed-upon secure messaging app. Dad stable but heavily sedated. M and L came by earlier, tried to get him moved to private facility. Hospital refused. FBI has patient protection order in place. Staying in room. Safe for now. Relief washed over me. At least the FBI was already taking steps to protect my father, which meant they had some idea of what was happening. But how much did they know? And how could I get this evidence to them without putting myself at risk? I texted back. Be careful. Evidence shows more dangerous than we thought. Meeting with someone who can help later today. That someone was a contact I'd made during my research the previous day. A journalist named Eleanor Chen who specialized in financial crimes and had written extensively about Ponzi schemes. She had agreed to meet me after I'd sent her a heavily redacted sample of what I had. As a journalist, she would have protections for her sources and might know how to approach law enforcement safely. But first, I needed to secure the original evidence. The flash drive in my possession was too vulnerable. It could be lost, damaged, or stolen. I needed digital backup and hard copies stored in multiple locations. I spent the morning making duplicate drives at an office supply store, then renting a small safe deposit box at a local bank under a name I'd never used for anything else, using the fake ID I'd acquired during my brief employment at my college newspaper for a story on identity theft. It wasn't totally legal, but nothing about this situation followed the rules of normal life anymore. At 2 p.m., I sat in the back corner of a crowded public library, my laptop open but positioned so no one else could see the screen. Eleanor Chen was late, and my nerves were fraying with each passing minute. Had something happened to her? Or worse, had she been intercepted? "Sorry I'm late." I nearly jumped out of my skin as a woman slid into the chair across from me. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, dressed in jeans and a simple blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Traffic was a nightmare," she explained, placing a coffee cup on the table. "You must be Robin." I nodded, using the pseudonym I'd given her. "Thank you for meeting me. Your email was intriguing," she said. "You mentioned evidence of a major financial fraud involving connections to organized crime figures. That's quite a claim." "It's not a claim," I said, sliding a duplicate flash drive across the table. "It's fact. Everything is on here. Bank records, emails, recorded conversations. Over $80 million stolen from hundreds of investors over nearly 2 decades, with at least 20 million of that used to launder money for drug cartels." Eleanor picked up the drive, her expression professionally neutral. "And how did you come by this information?" I hesitated. "I can't reveal my source. Not yet. But I can tell you it's authentic, and it came from someone at the center of the operation who wanted to expose it." "Someone with a guilty conscience?" she asked. "Something like that." I agreed, not ready to explain my personal connection to the case. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll need to verify everything, of course. Cross-reference accounts, confirm identities. If this is legitimate, it's an explosive story." "It's not just a story," I said urgently. "People are in danger right now. The people behind this, they've already tried to kill once. They won't hesitate to do it again if they feel cornered." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "Are you in danger?" "Possibly," I admitted. "But I'm not the only one. That's why I need your help. I want to take this to the FBI, but I need protection. These people have connections, political influence, ties to law enforcement. I can't just walk into a field office." "I understand," she said. "I have contacts at the Bureau who specialize in financial crimes. People I trust. If what you're saying checks out, they'll want to move quickly." "How quickly?" "Yes. That depends on how solid this evidence is," she replied, gesturing to the drive. "Mind if I take a look now?" I nodded, and she plugged the drive into her own laptop. As she scanned through the files, her professional composure gradually slipped, her eyes widening at particularly damning pieces of evidence. "This is..." She trailed off, scrolling through one of the spreadsheets that detailed the flow of money. "This is massive. And these names..." She pointed to a list of individuals who had received payments. "Some of these people are extremely powerful." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I'm terrified." She looked up at me, her expression serious. "You should be. But you're doing the right thing." She unplugged the drive and pocketed it. "I need a few hours to verify some of this and speak to my FBI contact. Where can I reach you?" I gave her the number of one of my prepaid phones. "I won't answer if you call. Send a text with a time and place to meet, and I'll be there." She nodded, understanding the precautions. "I'll be in touch by tonight." She stood to leave, then paused. "Be careful. Don't stay anywhere traceable." Don't use credit cards. Don't contact anyone who might be compromised. I won't, I promised. After she left, I remained in the library, using the public computers to monitor news sites for any mention of my father's case. So far, there was nothing, which meant Leonard and my mother had been successful in keeping it quiet. That was both good and bad. Good because it meant they might not be searching for me as aggressively. Bad because it meant they still had control of the narrative. My burner phone vibrated with another message from Thomas. Nurse says Dad more alert. Asking for you. Also, Elle came by again very agitated. Said he needs to speak to Dad alone about the children. Staff refused. I texted back. Don't leave Dad alone with Elle under any circumstances. Where is Em? His reply came quickly. Not seen since morning. Said she was going home to rest. That set off alarm bells. My mother wasn't the type to leave my father's side during a crisis, especially not when Leonard was clearly trying to get access to him. What was she doing? I was about to respond when another text came through. Security just came in. FBI agent here asking questions about family. What should I do? My heart raced. Had Eleanor already made contact with her FBI connections? Or was this unrelated? Perhaps triggered by my father's condition and the hospital's suspicions. Tell the truth, I texted back. But don't mention our communications or what you know about evidence. Just say we spoke. I was upset about family matters. Haven't heard from me since. I waited anxiously for his response, which took nearly 15 minutes to arrive. Done. Agent seemed interested in Elle more than anything. Asked if he's ever threatened Dad or shown violent tendencies. Also asked about Em's relationship with Elle. Weird questions. So the FBI was already investigating Leonard, possibly independently of anything I had provided. That was both reassuring and concerning. Reassuring because it meant they were on the right track. Concerning because it meant Leonard might be feeling trapped, which would make him more dangerous. I was pondering this when my phone vibrated again, this time with a message from Eleanor. Information checks out. Meeting arranged for 9 p.m. tonight. FBI safe house. Instructions to follow at 8:30. Delete these messages. A wave of relief washed over me. By tomorrow, the evidence would be in official hands. Thomas and my father would be protected. This nightmare might finally be coming to an end. I spent the next few hours moving between public places. A shopping mall, a movie theater, another diner. Never staying anywhere long enough to be noticed. At 8:25, I found a quiet spot in a park and waited for Eleanor's instructions. They came precisely at 8:30. An address in an industrial area on the outskirts of the city, along with a code word to use when I arrived. I memorized both, deleted the message, and headed toward the location, my nerves humming with anticipation and fear. The safe house turned out to be an unmarked warehouse with reinforced doors and security cameras mounted discreetly at the corners. I approached the side entrance as instructed and pressed the intercom button. Yes. A male voice responded. Bluebird, I said, using the code word Eleanor had provided. After a moment, the door buzzed open. I stepped inside to find a surprisingly well-appointed office space where 3 people waited. Eleanor, a middle-aged man in a suit who introduced himself as Special Agent Kaplan, and a younger female agent named Diaz. Thank you for coming, Agent Kaplan said, gesturing for me to sit. Ms. Chen has shared some disturbing information with us, along with evidence that appears to substantiate your claims. But we need to hear directly from you what you know about Richard and Catherine's operation. I took a deep breath. Before I tell you everything, I need assurances. My father is in the hospital, vulnerable. My brother is with him, but they're both at risk. I need to know they'll be protected. The agents exchanged glances. We already have agents at the hospital, Agent Diaz said. Your father has been under FBI protection since he regained consciousness, though discreetly. This was news to me. Why? How did you know about the threats to him? Because he contacted us, Agent Kaplan said. Last week, Richard reached out to our office. He was planning to turn himself in and provide evidence against his partners in exchange for leniency. He specifically expressed fear for his safety and yours. My father had already been working with the FBI. The meeting that Leonard and my mother had discovered wasn't hypothetical. It had already happened. The day after our initial meeting with him, he suffered a heart attack, Agent Diaz continued. Given the timing and his previously expressed concerns, we've been investigating the possibility that it wasn't natural. It wasn't, I said firmly. I have video evidence of my mother and Leonard discussing how to incapacitate him. They wanted to stop him from confessing. Agent Kaplan leaned forward. That would change the nature of our investigation significantly. Attempted murder carries much heavier penalties than financial crimes. It gets worse, I said, steeling myself for what I needed to reveal. The evidence suggests they've done it before. There are communications about containment of problems, people who knew too much. I think my parents and Leonard may have been involved in more than just fraud. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Agent Kaplan spoke. We need everything you have, the video, the communications, all of it. And we need your full statement. This case just became much higher priority. I nodded, reaching into my bag for the original flash drive and the printed copies I'd made. But as I did, my burner phone vibrated with a text from Thomas. One word. Snowflake. Our danger signal. My hand froze halfway to my bag. Something's wrong. My brother just sent our emergency code. I quickly texted back. What's happening? The response came seconds later. Am here with doctor. Signing papers to transfer dad to private facility. Security gone. Help. Cold fear washed over me. They're trying to move my father from the hospital. Right now. Agent Diaz was already on her phone, barking orders. Agent Kaplan stood up. Which hospital? I told him, and he immediately began coordinating with someone over his radio. We have agents nearby, but it will take them at least 15 minutes to get there. If they're moving your father now. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I need to go there. Now. That's not a good idea, Eleanor interjected. If your mother and Leonard are there, you'd be putting yourself in danger. My father and brother are already in danger, I countered. And I'm the only one who can stall them until your agents arrive. Agent Kaplan looked conflicted, then nodded. Agent Diaz will go with you. I'll coordinate from here and have backup meet you at the hospital. He turned to me with a stern expression. But you stay with Agent Diaz at all times, understand? No heroics. I nodded quickly. The evidence is all here, I said, handing over my bag with the flash drive and documents. Everything you need. As Agent Diaz and I rushed to her unmarked car, I texted Thomas again. Stall them. Help coming. 15 minutes. His response was immediate and chilling. Can't. Already moving him. Leonard has gun. Threatening staff. The situation had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. Leonard was armed and desperate enough to threaten hospital staff. My father was being moved against medical advice. And my brother was caught in the middle. As Agent Diaz sped toward the hospital, siren wailing, I tried to process how quickly events had spiraled out of control. We had been so close, just minutes away from turning over all the evidence, from ending this nightmare. Now we were racing against time to prevent what could only be described as a kidnapping, or worse. Can you tell me exactly what we're walking into? Agent Diaz asked as she navigated traffic. Who's present? Where are they likely taking your father? My mother and Leonard for sure, I said. Possibly others. Leonard has connections to organized crime. They mentioned a private facility, but I don't know where. It could be legitimate or it could be a cover. And Leonard is armed. According to my brother, yes. I've seen the gun myself. And he's desperate now. If he knows the FBI is involved, he has nothing to lose. Agent Diaz's expression was grim as she relayed this information over her radio. The responses from her colleagues weren't reassuring. Hospital security had been temporarily diverted by a fire alarm on another floor. By the time they realized it was a diversion, my father had been disconnected from his monitors and was being moved. We were 3 minutes from the hospital when my phone vibrated again. Another text from Thomas. In private ambulance. Dad unconscious again. Don't think it's natural. Following in my car. Tracking on. Thomas had activated his phone's location sharing. A small blessing. At least we could track where they were taking our father. They've already moved him, I told Agent Diaz, showing her the message. My brother says our father is unconscious again. He thinks they've drugged him. Agent Diaz's face hardened as she accelerated even more, weaving through traffic with expert precision. We'll have roadblocks set up. They won't get far. But I wasn't so sure. Leonard and my mother had evaded detection for decades. They had connections, resources, and now, the desperation of people with nothing to lose. As we screeched into the hospital parking lot, I spotted Thomas's car pulling out onto the main road, following an unmarked white ambulance with no lights or sirens. There. Pointed. That's them. Agent Diaz made a sharp turn, falling in behind Thomas's car at a distance. We don't want to spook them, she explained. If they realize they're being followed, the situation could escalate. I understood her caution, but every fiber of my being screamed to get to my father before it was too late. What did they plan to do with him? Make his heart condition take a fatal turn. Make him disappear entirely. The ambulance wove through city streets, heading toward the outskirts where warehouses and industrial buildings gradually replaced residential areas. Thomas maintained his pursuit at a careful distance, and we stayed even farther back, coordinating with other agents who were converging on the area. Finally, the ambulance turned into the parking lot of an abandoned-looking medical facility, a small private hospital that had closed years earlier according to the faded sign. Thomas drove past the entrance, then pulled over a block away. We stopped behind him. Stay here, Agent Diaz ordered as she exited the car, weapon already drawn. But there was no way I was staying behind when my father and brother were in danger. As soon as she approached Thomas's car, I slipped out and moved along the shadows of the buildings, making my way toward the facility. Through a gap in the fence, I could see the ambulance parked at a loading dock. 2 men in paramedic uniforms were unloading a stretcher where my father lay, still and pale. My mother stood nearby, directing them, while Leonard scanned the surroundings, one hand inside his jacket where I knew the gun was hidden. I edged closer, trying to hear what they were saying. My mother's voice carried on the night air, tense and commanding. Get him inside quickly. The private doctor is waiting. Once he's stabilized, we move to the next location. Leonard looked nervous. We should have gone straight there. This stop wasn't part of the plan. We need him conscious but cooperative for the transfers, my mother snapped. Unless you want to explain to Border Control why we're transporting an unconscious man. Border Control. They were planning to take him out of the country. I had heard enough. I needed to get back to Agent Diaz and Thomas, to tell them what was happening before my father disappeared forever. But as I turned to retreat, I found my path blocked by a large man I didn't recognize. Boss, he called out, grabbing my arm roughly. Found someone snooping around. Leonard's head snapped in our direction, and even from a distance, I could see the moment he recognized me. The widening of his eyes, the flash of something like triumph mixed with fear. Bring her here, he commanded. As the man dragged me toward the loading dock, I caught sight of Thomas and Agent Diaz crouched behind vehicles at the edge of the property, watching helplessly as the situation deteriorated. Agent Diaz had her weapon drawn but couldn't risk a shot with me now in the middle of the group. Leonard pulled his gun as I was pushed roughly in front of him. My mother turned, her expression shifting from shock to cold calculation. I should have known you'd turn up, she said. Always the righteous one. Just like your father. Let him go, I demanded, struggling to keep my voice steady. It's over. The FBI has everything, the evidence, the videos, all of it. Agents are surrounding this building right now. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Leonard's face, But my mother remained impassive. "She's bluffing," she told him. "There's no way the FBI moved that quickly." "I'm not bluffing," I insisted. "They've been watching Dad since before his heart attack. They knew he was cooperating with them." This news did cause my mother's composure to slip. "That's impossible. We would have known." "You didn't know he had a recording device in his office either," I countered. "You didn't know about the evidence he collected against you both. You've been sloppy, and now it's catching up to you." Leonard's grip on the gun tightened. "Shut up. Both of you." He turned to my mother. "We need to go. With or without Richard." "We're not leaving without him," my mother insisted. "The offshore accounts are still in his name. We need his signatures." Their argument gave me a momentary opening. I lunged toward the stretcher where my father lay, reaching for him. But Leonard was faster, grabbing me by the hair and yanking me back. "Not so fast," he snarled, pressing the gun to my temple. "You're coming with us too. Another bit of insurance." My mother looked at me, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw a flicker of maternal concern in her eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Tie her up," she instructed the men. "Put her in the ambulance with Richard." As rough hands began binding my wrists with plastic zip ties, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Thomas emerging from his hiding place, moving stealthily toward us. Simultaneously, I could make out the shapes of FBI agents taking up positions around the perimeter of the property. This was it, the moment everything would either fall apart completely or finally come to an end. My family's final breaking point. The flickering light of dawn barely crept through the slats of the blinds when I heard the first gunshot. The crack echoed faintly, muffled by distance, but it was accompanied by an even more terrifying sound. My own stifled screams as I felt Leonard's hand clamp down on my hair with enough force to tear skin. With the gun pressed to my temple, I had no choice but to obey when he shoved me into the makeshift ambulance, dragging my unconscious father onto the gurney. "Move it, you useless waste," he snarled, prodding me with the barrel of the revolver. I stumbled over to the gurney, hesitant, but the weight of the gun and the lethal look in his eyes stifled any thought of resistance. Behind us, my mother and the henchmen stood silent and vigilant. It didn't matter who witnessed this horror. We were inside an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by scrap metal and rusted barrels, somewhere isolated on the outskirts of the city. Leonard had chosen that spot precisely because he believed the FBI would be slow to arrive. I was certain they wouldn't. Suspicious ambulance. Armed man escorting victim into abandoned building. Investigate immediately. Agent Diaz's hushed voice crackled through the radio in my ear, a grim reminder that the end was closer than it seemed. Behind crates piled high and shards of broken glass, Thomas and I traded tense glances. He was crouched behind a shipping container, weapon at the ready, but I ordered him not to fire until I confirmed my father was in imminent danger. We couldn't just storm in and turn the place into a shooting gallery. Not with hostages involved. My father and me. When the henchman began pushing the gurney into the warehouse, I knew I had to act. Carefully, I tore a fragment of concrete loose that I could use as a distraction. "Thomas, on my count, toss it over there." He nodded. 3, 2, 1. The stone flew toward a stack of dry wooden boards, producing a loud bang. The guard who had closed the warehouse door for us spun around to see what caused the noise and stumbled over the gurney, losing his grip on my father's body. In that instant, Thomas sprang forward, his gun aimed at the disoriented guard. "Don't move," he shouted. Leonard, standing just a few feet from me, turned his back at the exact moment Thomas fired his revolver. He shoved my mother aside and bellowed, "Cover me!" But not before the bullet tore through his shoulder, causing him to stagger and drop the gun to the floor. The shot reverberated in the damp, echoing space of the warehouse, but was soon drowned out by the arrival of 4 FBI agents bursting through the side entrance, weapons drawn, shouting commands in unison. "FBI, drop your weapons. Get down on your knees now." Leonard clutched the blood-soaked hole in his shoulder as a second bullet ripped through his right arm, and he fell to his knees, the barrel of the shotgun clattering against the floor. The man who had been holding me by the waist received a swift kick from Thomas to the jaw and rolled unconscious across the dusty ground. My mother froze, eyes wide in terror as the agents closed in. Thomas dropped his weapon and raced to my father's side, dropping to his knees beside the gurney. I broke free from the men forcing me forward and rushed to the opposite side, gently placing my hand on my father's shoulder. He was unconscious but still breathing, his ashen face lit by the eerie green glow of the monitor some agents had brought inside. Agent Diaz approached, quickly checking his vitals. "He's alive but heavily sedated. We need to get him to the hospital ambulance immediately." 2 agents grabbed my arms, helping me to my feet. My mother wailed as she was handcuffed by other agents, refusing to accept the scene she had helped orchestrate. "It's a mistake. He's delirious, making things up," she screamed, her face pressed into the cold concrete floor. Leonard, now cuffed, was thrown face down, smeared with dust and blood, while I leaned over my father, fearful each breath might be his last. At the hospital, the atmosphere was too tense for words. My fellow officers separated my father and me, escorting us into the ICU, while other law enforcement cordoned off the warehouse that had served as our improvised prison. Thomas followed me like a protective brother, but we both stood in shocked silence. My father was rushed to imaging, despite his weakened state. His heart had endured the sedation and the rough transport. He still slept, tangled in tubes and wires, and it was hard to reconcile this frail, wrinkled man with the father I once knew. "He's going to be okay," Agent Diaz assured me after they confirmed my father was out of immediate danger. "He needs rest, but they're reversing the sedatives. We found traces of narcotics in his blood, but nothing fatal." The FBI and civil police shared custody of my parents, Leonard, and their accomplices. 8 people in total were arrested that day. All were indicted not only for defrauding hundreds of investors, but also for attempted murder, kidnapping, and leading a criminal organization. The family's assets were frozen, estimated at roughly 150 million Brazilian reals, tied up in offshore accounts and luxury properties. Almost nothing had been left untouched. I pored over every detail of the provisional report Agent Kaplan handed me. Investigators uncovered lists of over 1,000 victims, deposit records, tampered contracts. My mother and Leonard's escape plan was just the tip of the iceberg. At its core lay connections to international drug cartels, and the network extended to officials who took bribes. It was a labyrinth of deceit, but the thread that unraveled it all was my father. More precisely, the confession he had given authorities days before the staged attack. "No one expected him to talk," Agent Kaplan confided as I reviewed the documents. "When we got that anonymous tip, we figured it was just another run-of-the-mill informant. But he seemed determined to cleanse his conscience. He was so convinced of his repentance that it stunned us. We never had a chance to intercept him before." "The incident at the golf course," he sighed. "You and your brother were crucial in identifying the suspects. If not for your courage, we'd never have been able to piece this puzzle together in time." Thomas squeezed my hand. "He's our father, and even though I found out he isn't my biological father, he's always been my father in every way that matters." His voice trembled, but his eyes burned with unwavering resolve. He remained that sweet boy, willing to fight to the last bullet for the sake of family. I knew we needed to tell the police and the victims' families the whole story, even if it meant risking our future. After so many lies, we were nearly the only bridge between the innocent memories of those investors and the brutal truth that had deceived them. The next morning, when I finally pressed my face against the pillow in the apartment I still called mine, even though my bank account could no longer afford such luxury, I felt a mix of relief and emptiness. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating the sparsely furnished living room, the few pieces of furniture offering a small refuge. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "Charges have been filed. Dad will remain under hospital custody for a few more days, but the FBI requested his transfer to a secure psychiatric facility. Want me to come by today?" I replied. Yes, let's talk. 2 p.m. When we met at a nearby cafe, Thomas arrived with a calmness I hadn't expected. Exhaustion still marked his face, but his eyes held a blend of sorrow and relief. "He's stable," he began, fiddling with his coffee straw, fingers still shaking. "The court approved our request to place him in a supervised psychiatric hospital. We argued that he'll recover better away from prison, as long as they ensure maximum security. Our defense will emphasize that he cooperated fully after the attack." I nodded, though my throat still burned. "And what about our lives? Everything we built? My job, my investments, my apartment?" Thomas looked at me gratefully. "The FBI assured me your records will be cleared. Federal legal experts will prove you were a victim, not an accomplice. Your name, the only one untarnished in this mess, will be kept out of the case. You can even return to your job. They recognize that your cooperation was essential to dismantling this syndicate." A knot loosened in my chest. At least I could rebuild my finances and continue the career I'd dreamed of since college, with a new awareness that the real world hides dark secrets. "And what about your future, Thomas?" I asked softly. "You're entitled to an inheritance, right?" He smiled, not quite joyfully, but with a spark of hope. "I have the paperwork from the registry office in my pocket. Now that Mom has relinquished her guardianship over my trust, I'll receive everything that's rightfully mine, but I'm required to donate a substantial portion to the victims. That's what the court has mandated. I'm dividing it into 3 categories: those who lost their homes, those who lost their pensions, and those who simply lost their faith in trusting others." I took a deep breath. In that moment, I realized that despite everything, we could attempt to rebuild what remained: trust, honor, family. My father would surely face a sentence, but he had a chance for redemption in God's eyes, and perhaps even use his financial expertise to atone for the harm he had caused. The road ahead would be long, but he had chosen to surrender rather than die. That choice would afford him some redemption. "Will you continue working on the case?" "Yes." "Yes," he said. "I'll serve on the Justice Department's Compensation Council, representing the victims. I want to use my name to restore what was stolen from me. And you?" He looked at me tenderly, as though reading my soul. "Where does Robin of this new world go from here?" I hesitated, memories of sleepless nights and all the despair that brought me to this point flooding my mind. But deep down, I felt the spark that had kept me alive. The urgency of justice, the need to protect my brother, and the determination to live without false pretenses. "I'm going to work with you, but outside the financial system, at least for a while," I answered, stretching in the creaky wooden chair beneath us. I was thinking of starting an NGO to help people in low-income communities with financial literacy, teaching them how to spot scams like the ones Dad engineered. If I owe part of my life to that whirlwind, let it be so no one else has to endure what we did. Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in days. "That's perfect. Let's call it Transparent Lives. You'll lead the educational initiatives. I'll handle administrative matters. Fighting fraud," I added, raising my coffee cup in a toast, "so that the stories of the victims are always remembered, and trust is built on truth, not illusion." He tapped his cup lightly against mine, and we both toasted, feeling the weight of our grief lift with the early afternoon light. The journey was far from over, but there, beside my brother, or rather, my cousin who had always been a brother in every meaningful way, I felt that we had stepped from darkness into the light, ready to write the next chapter where honesty and justice would prevail. And for the first time in a long time, the word family felt less like a trap and more like the promise of a possible reconstruction. Still painful, but genuine and worthy of faith.